William Krist is a global fellow with the Wilson Center's Asia and Environmental Change and Security programs. He joins us to discuss trade agreements and the campaign of 2016. Bill, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, John. Pleasure to be here.
I want to ask you, formerly one of the few remaining bipartisan issues in Washington was trade. And now in this campaign, it's one of the hot button issues. How did that happen?
Well, it used to be more that the Republicans were pro-free trade and for trade agreements. The Democrats were a lot less so. There was a wing of the Democratic Party that supported trade agreements, but the majority did not. So authority for negotiating trade agreements, it had to pass Congress, routinely depended on Republican votes. But it's almost like in the 2016 campaign, trade has become more bipartisan. It's become the big boogeyman.
In the negative.
In the negative. You've got, on the Democratic side, Bernie Sanders, totally opposed to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Donald Trump has said it's an awful agreement. He's going to renegotiate it and make it awesome. And Hillary Clinton has come out in opposition to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, although back when she was Secretary of State, she supported it.
So a bottom line question about this is how do trade deals, good trade deals or bad trade deals, as the case may be, relate to income inequality and unemployment?
Well, that's a great question. And the economic literature has a big range of what they say the impact of trade is. I think the basic consensus comes out that trade is about 20% responsible for unemployment and for income inequality in America. So the 80%, the big one is technology. And you've got robots that have replaced people on assembly lines, computers, all of that has displaced a lot of jobs. And the technology problem's about to get a lot worse. You've got stuff like driverless cars coming along, and that's going to put cabbies out of business, and bus drivers and truck drivers, and a lot of repair shops right now are going to shut down because there won't be as many accidents and what have you. And that's not to mention things like artificial intelligence and more robots and stuff. So
sounds like there should be a political movement against technology instead of against trade deals.
Well, that's a great point. The reason that everybody picks on trade is because it's a visible boogeyman. You can pick on it, but there's nothing that you can do about technology. So what the U.S. has to do is we've got to develop better methods for employing people and for helping people who are unemployed.
So in this environment, given all these considerations, President Obama making a final push perhaps for TPP passage, what are the prospects in this environment?
Well, of course, President Obama's pushing for passage in what is called the lame duck session of Congress. So that'd be right after the elections, before the new congressmen and senators take their seats after the election.
So by then everybody knows who's staying and who's leaving.
That's right. But both candidates, Trump and Clinton, have opposed taking it up in the lame duck. Labor, a lot of non-government organizations, very strongly opposed to it. My own feeling is I don't think it's going to be taken up, and if it was, I think it would be a huge mistake. I think that what the campaign has demonstrated is there's a lot of angst out in the country, a lot of concern about trade, and if it was taken up in the lame duck and passed in the lame duck, that would really exacerbate all the anger out there in the country.
Beyond that zeitgeist you describe, is the deal itself as currently constituted a good deal or a bad deal? And I know that's an oversimplification perhaps, but
yeah, no, it's a good way of looking at it. I think that it's extremely important that the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, which is an agreement between the U.S. and 11 other countries in the Asia-Pacific region, I think it's terribly important it get passed. But I think that there are some glaring problems with the current negotiated agreement that need to be fixed before it should be passed. The biggest one is that the agreement doesn't deal with currency manipulation. Mm-hmm. And that's a mercantilistic practice that Japan used back in the late 70s and the 80s, and China's used in recent decades, although probably not right now, to gain an unfair commercial advantage at other countries' expense, particularly the U.S. And the U.S. has never dealt with that. Well, there was enormous pressure to put it in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but it really isn't. There's this very flimsy agreement that was announced in parallel to it that really just basically...
Lip service?
Lip service, totally lip service. So I think that's got to be fixed, and there's some other loopholes that have to be fixed.
But you began by saying it's important that it be passed. Why? What is necessary about it?
The first thing that is necessary, in my view, is it's very, very important for U.S. foreign policy and U.S. national security. The Asia-Pacific region is the fastest growing region in the country. You've got China's rise, and China is very much pushing to have its state-dominated, mercantilistic economic model be the trade model. That would be very dangerous for the U.S. in the long term.
And China's not part of this agreement, so this is a challenge to China.
That's right.
In a sense.
I don't see it as a challenge, but a lot of people do. But so national security, foreign policy is very important. The agreement has some very interesting, important new features. It's got prohibition against cyber theft, which is U.S. companies and our government and the Democratic Party and everybody else has really gotten hurt very badly by that. It has disciplines for the first time on state-owned enterprises, and they're becoming a major element in international competition today. So I think both for foreign policy, national security grounds, and economic grounds, it really needs to be passed.
What would be the costs if it doesn't pass? How would that set us back in relations with the countries we've been negotiating with?
Well, I think it'd be really bad. There'd be a lot of cost to it. China has been leading an effort to negotiate a thing called the RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Program, that includes a lot of the countries negotiating in the TPP, but includes a lot of others like India and Korea. So that would go forward. And so China would really be setting the rules in that region. But it's much more critical even than that. You have countries like Australia, our longest, best ally, maybe next to Great Britain. Mm-hmm. And Australia has the major commercial ties with Australia today are with China. And Australia and that whole region is worried about China saying that their maritime region is greater than normally recognized by international law, and a number of things like this. So they're very worried about it. TPP is the main thing that the U.S. has done in pivoting towards Asia. So they're going to see it as a huge U.S. pullback from Asia, maybe even a betrayal. It would have enormous impact if it fails.
You mentioned the very critical aspects of the Trump and Sanders campaigns as it relates to TPP, and Hillary Clinton to a lesser extent. Right. NAFTA has also come up, and other trade agreements. What is the future of NAFTA or other agreements post-election? Is there any chance that the United States would consider either attempting to alter or pull out of existing deals?
Well, that's a great question. Trump, of course, has said that he would seek to renegotiate NAFTA, and if he can't, he would pull out. So, in a sense, NAFTA has already been renegotiated by the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Canada and Mexico are both parts of the TPP. The TPP updates a lot of the rules that are in NAFTA. For example, in the labor and the environment chapters, there's a lot of more requirements for the countries to do, and it's subject to dispute settlement. So there's a big upgrade there. The U.S. could pull out of NAFTA. There's a provision in there that you give notice of that, and 6 months later you can pull out, but there would be a big cost. If the U.S. pulled out, presumably Canada and Mexico would be subject to our normal tariff rate. So consumers would see price increases right away. A lot of companies depend on importing parts and materials from Canada and Mexico. and they would see their production chains totally disrupted. And so that alone would kick us into recession.
U.S. version of the Brexit, perhaps.
Right.
I want to do a plug on your behalf, Bill, because for people who are interested in trade, this is a sober, serious voice beyond the politics. A guy who's been at it for a long time, and this is his book, Globalization and America's Trade Agreements. And you tell me you're going to have a new website upcoming soon, which will have some free chapters available on it.
Right. Yeah, that we'll put the whole thing on, and I'm going to have a new one on the Trans-Pacific Partnership and what it means.
Terrific resource for people who are interested. But before we close, one final thought. Moving forward, looking ahead beyond all the things we've talked about, is the Washington consensus on trade dead in the water? And is there a need to build a new consensus, and what would that look like?
Well, I don't think it's dead in the water. What has happened, going way back to World War II, there were huge trade barriers that basically blocked trade. And what has happened in trade negotiations since then has been a constant pattern of trying to get rid of those barriers and distortions so that you have a situation where companies can basically compete on a level playing field, a so-called level playing field. Well, you can never really get to a level playing field, but it's been moving that way. Well, the Trans-Pacific Partnership and negotiations between the U.S. and Europe have always been visualized as a way of moving towards that kind of a situation. Well, to get there, the TPP needs to, in my judgment, address some of these problems that it hasn't, like currency manipulation and investor-state dispute settlement and things like that. So I would argue that those things ought to be fixed. And the TPP and our negotiations with Europe, we should try to make that a template for future trade rules. Now, there's a big risk. You could have a situation where we have the TPP and our agreement with Europe, and China doesn't join, although the hope is that they would join the TPP, but maybe they don't, and maybe they pull in India and a bunch of other countries, and you have two big trading blocs, which would be really bad. But I think we should move forward trying to fix the TPP and encouraging China and India and other countries to join in.
Well, and however that plays out, we'll have you back to talk about it at the time.
Super. Okay. Thank
Thanks
you very much.
for joining us, as always, Bill.
Appreciate it. Glad to be here.